A background that might have led me to the peace and justice situation. Part of it is my father, who was something of a pacifist, though I don't think he was particularly during World War II, but he was to the point where he lost his job at Texas A&M in the First World War. He was a professor down there teaching, I think it was civil engineering, and he wrote several letters, and I have some of them, to the press and objected to the involvement of the United States in World War I and the rather vitriolic letters that were written back in the articles and so forth. So that is in my background. And then when we were moved to New Jersey, he worked for RCA. They sent me to a Quaker school, although we were not Quakers, and we, in fact, were Presbyterians and later Episcopalians, but the Quaker school did have some influence, and particularly the Quaker Friends. I got to know quite a lot of them, and I had all kinds of respect for their positions. I didn't see how people could live that way, but at the same time, I did understand where they were coming from to an extent.
What positions, excuse me?
Well, they're positions of nonviolence and not participating in armed conflict. You know, the movie Friendly Persuasion, it really sort of plays that up, I think. I honestly don't know what happened to those people during the war and whether any of them did participate, but because we had left the town by then. But I sort of understood where they were coming from. However, I married a New Englander, and out of a fairly conservative family, and they were Republicans. They particularly disliked Roosevelt. I particularly liked him. So that was a point of discussion with my in-laws. But on the whole, I wasn't too much of an anti-war person during World War II. And in fact, it wasn't until the Vietnam War, I think, that I really began to pick up on some of that. And Amy was in college at the time and part of the anti-war protesting. I don't know that she ever did any protests at Bates College. I don't think she did.
This is your daughter?
My daughter. But she, well, she and her fiance went down to New York City and worked in Harlem some. They were part of that effort and that movement, and very much into the anti-war thing. And my eyes began to be opened. I guess at the same time, my husband died in that period of time, or just shortly after. And I guess I was kind of upset all over the place. I mean, there were a whole lot of changes in my life, and I began to think about the politics and the fact that the Vietnam War seemed to be more of an industrial, military complex type of effort than it was a justified war. It's something that I think Hitler was another matter, really, and I can understand people wanting to prevent him from being such a take over the world sort of thing. So I think that's probably the background from which I came. Then when Bob died, and we had not been in town very long, and he had been asked to serve on the mission committee at church. We had joined the North Congregational Church. And when and he was part of that. But when he died, fairly suddenly, but I knew he wasn't well, but I didn't think he was that sick. And then Bonnie, who was chairperson of the mission committee, asked me to replace him on the committee. So I began to get involved in some of the things that she was involved in, and when Scudder Parker and Pam and others started the peace movement, or the peace committee, I was part of that as well.
What was it about the peace team that interested you, that drew you to it, do you think?
Well, I think partly it was to fill the gap with Bob gone. For a while it was sort of a support group. But then I began to get very much interested in the things they were doing. I think a big influence probably is Scudder, because he's quite a charismatic sort of person, and he made a whole lot of sense to me. And Bonnie did too, Pam, and the other members of the team.
What were they saying that made so much sense?
I think one of the things that I remember particularly well was conflict resolution without violence, you know. And part of the thing that interested me in that was that I was teaching school, and when the kids would get into hassles, how could you devices, techniques to get them settling their disputes without resorting to fisticuffs or wrestling matches, which of course I wouldn't have let go on anyway, but at least maybe get it resolved before. But some of the injustices which aren't in the major press, it was an access to the what do I want to say, subculture press, which I'd never particularly had. I think that all influenced me. I can remember the Nestle boycott that they mounted.
What was that about?
Well, it was using infant formula. That was the place it was, and providing it to the countries of less developed countries, and urging mothers to use the formula rather than breastfeed. And I guess that part became also part of my own daughter's efforts to breastfeed her children, and she was very much pro that. I'd not had that opportunity I guess I had it, but I didn't use it because nobody did in my day. And but it seemed to me a real exploitation of people. And that's the main boycott that I remember clearly, but there were others too. And then I began to realize more recently that those, there's so much interlacing of the companies now that boycotting Nestle for infant formula doesn't necessarily, there may be some good things that Nestle makes that makes it hard to fully boycott them, and you can't without finding out all their interlocking affairs, and that's hard. But anyway, that was one thing, but I just enjoyed getting into the activities. I think I did more demonstrating at that point than I do now. But partly because I think demonstration after demonstration, this is my own idea. Well, he doesn't agree with me, nor does Janet. But I think it loses its punch if it's done too regularly. If it's some issue, like our bombing in Iraq, which sort of flares up, then I think we should get out there. But other than that, to just demonstrate seems sort of futile to me, or counterproductive. And so anyway, but I still like working with the team. There's a lot of things that they do. And of course, the peace team evolved eventually into the Coalition of for Justice and Peace. But the peace team went on for quite a long time, and we had regular meetings and put out brochures and did some demonstrating, and I felt I got quite a lot of education in that. So it's hard for me to go back and think through all those without going back and looking over all the materials that much of which I've kept, which I'm not giving it up because it's an awful big box full of it. So I don't specifically know the answer to the evolution. I can't trace it, and that's 30 plus years ago.
What, besides that Nestle boycott, what are some of the problems in the world that you're most concerned about now?
Today?
Yeah.
I'm concerned about I'm concerned about the underdeveloped countries not getting the kind of help they need, and I don't think that the United States has all the answers for that. I don't think that if they're lacking water to go in and build dams on rivers that have never been dammed is productive. In fact, it's often destructive. I think helping them to find access to water, clean water, given their own culture, working within the culture they've got. But I think I'm very concerned about global issues. In all the world, let's see, what are they? Well, I'm concerned about things like the Israeli-Palestinian face-off there, and wishing that they could find some way to compromise, being quite irritated at Netanyahu, how do you say his name? I was concerned when the Soviet Union broke up because I feared for the smaller places. I didn't see how they could function as well as in fact they have. They've done better than I thought they might because they had been so thoroughly integrated into the Soviet Union that it would be hard for them to stand alone. I think there has been. I'm still in contact with some of the people from Estonia that we visited or that visited here, and it's been really rough on them. But they are getting along better than they were. I'm concerned about the injustices in China, but I'm not sure that sanctions and trying to punish them economically, which is as productive, and especially since I think it's mostly a football between Democrats and Republicans about how we're going to treat them, instead of real concern for them. So, I guess I don't know if it's ready yet or not.
Anytime's okay.
You asked about the Bridges for Peace. I'm trying to remember the date, but I think it was the early 80s when Clint Gardner down in Hanover, Norwich, got the thing organized. And he did a lot of work. Well, he was an importer. He traveled and brought in artifacts to sell, and that was his business. And so he made a number of trips specifically to Russia, and realized that there was potential there, that if we could make connections, person-to-person sort of connections, it would be a help. So he began the organization of it, and shortly, a year or two later, he managed to persuade a group of, I think about 15 men and women to come over for a visit here. And it was a 2-week visit, and this was still back when Khrushchev was head of Russia, I guess.
So 15 people from Russia?
From Russia, well, from all parts of Russia. And I was in on some of that, and I was in on the very first meeting that they had when they got here, as was Bonnie. Bonnie and I went together down to that. And then because, then we had an opportunity, because we'd been in early on it, to entertain two of them up here. As after a period of a few days down in Hanover, then they spread out. They went in pairs to various places. And because I have space here, I entertained the two Russian. One was from Moscow, was a woman journalist from Moscow, and a physicist from Latvia, from Riga. And they stayed here, but we organized, the peace team organized a whole series of programs for them where we made them available to the public to talk, and tried to give them some experiences of American life, and also some exposure to for the people to come. I remember that one of the places we offered them to as a speaking place was at North Church, and we had quite a good-sized crowd, and they talked very well. The journalists, well, they both talked English very well. The physicist had been here before, and he spoke good English, and so did the journalist.
That's good. That's good.
Take three.
I was talking about the Bridges for Peace group, that the two that came in, and they were talking at the North Church, and afterwards they took questions like most places, most people do. And one of the men in the congregation, or in the audience, said, well, now that you're here, don't you want to stay? And I thought, how dumb can you be? Because and I can't remember her name, but anyway, the woman journalist said, well, my family's all living in the Soviet Union, and I know for a fact that they didn't terribly well like some things in America. I mean, they felt that they had freedom from want, freedom of being sure they had a house, freedom of having a job, freedom of being medically cared for. They were not quite so much interested in what we consider our freedoms as they were in the freedoms they felt they had, which we don't have. We don't have the certainty of those. Anyway, we enjoyed their trip very much, and because we had been, I had been anyway, involved early on, I was invited by Bridges for Peace to go to the Soviet Union, free, for the return trip. So, but they were going to go in October, and so I went to my school board and I said, would you release me for a couple of weeks to go to the Soviet Union? And they considered it, and at least two people on the board said they thought there was no reason I shouldn't, that it would be a good idea. And the other part of it is I had built up over 100 days of sick leave, so it seemed to me I could use some of that for that. But then there was one person involved that was an ex-military man, and he thought we shouldn't have any truck with the Soviet Union, so they came down hard. It was my job or my trip, so I decided I needed my job list. So I didn't go that trip, but I promised myself that as soon as I could, I would. So after I retired in '88, by that time, the Bridges for Peace had rearranged things so that there was a group, so that each area was matched, twinned with an area in the Soviet Union that was similar in economics, in geography, for various reasons. And the Vermont, New Hampshire group was twinned with Estonia. And there was a Massachusetts group that was twinned with Kiev and so forth. By that time, the Bridges for Peace group had spread to, well, into Wisconsin and down south to Carolinas, I think. Anyway, it was a much wider thing, not just a very local thing. So, so we went to Moscow with about 15 people and spent a couple of days in Moscow looking around, sightseeing, and also meeting with the Peace Committee in Moscow. And then those of us from Vermont, New Hampshire went to Estonia. Spent a day or two in Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia, meeting again with the peace team and Peace Committee in Tallinn. And then we were farmed out in ones and twos to various spots in the Soviet Union, and we wound up in a rural Rockvera, a rural community, which is largely, I wound up on a farm, but it was my host spoke some English, and his daughter, who spoke some English, he was the sort of purchasing agent for the farm, so he had quite a lot of, I think they lived better than a lot of the workers. It was really interesting, and I enjoyed visiting them. They were very cordial. They knocked themselves out to give me all kinds of experiences there. And the whole group from Vermont, New Hampshire that had gone met together more than once and went various places, so we got to see quite a lot of the geography of Estonia. And it was interesting and fun. As I say, they were really they offered to drive me to St. Petersburg, but then they sort of backed off on that because it was going to be a long trip and take a lot of time. But they had their own house. She was a professional artist, making very good money as an artist because the Soviet Union was very supportive of art and culture. And their daughter was a high school student. Their son was, I guess, junior high level or so. And we had an interesting time. I'm thinking of one funny thing that happened was that she asked me what I especially like to eat, and I was fishing for something to tell her. And I told her that I like salads. So she produced a salad, which was chopped cabbage and a berry which looked very much like a cranberry that was just sour and not treated in any way, and with no dressing on it. And it was served 3 times a day to me, so I had to eat salad for breakfast and salad for lunch and salad for dinner. You asked about the Peace Committee in the Soviet Union, and we did meet, as I said, with the ones in Tallinn and also in Moscow. My feeling, looking back on it, was that an awful lot of what they were thinking about was to impress us as representatives of the United States with what great country they were, and especially this was true in Moscow. It was a lot of formal talk, sort of this person spoke and that person spoke, and they spoke around the table and presented gifts and accepted gifts and that sort of thing. I don't think there was real discussion. When we got to the one in Tallinn in Estonia, it was maybe more that they were anxious to impress us with how much they had been exploited by the Russians, how anxious they were to be independent, how they felt that the Russians were not giving them freedoms that they did want, how lousy the Russian workers were who had come in to do a lot of the laboring work. They felt that their schools, which were they were new buildings but not in too good shape, and their comment was often how really the Russians were slobs and didn't know how to do anything right, and it was more anti-Russian than it was peace as such. I think at that point the danger of bombing each other, the United States and the Soviet Union, had somewhat abated. People had gotten, so they weren't quite so afraid of each other. But they wanted to establish ties with the United States. They wanted our support for their independence. And one of the this didn't happen in the Peace Committee meeting. Again, the Peace Committee meetings tended to be formalized. You speak and receive gifts and give gifts and so forth. But I remember when we were walking around a ruins of a cathedral that had been an old a place in that area, and how there were 2 or 3 Russian soldiers that walked by in uniform, and they made some very loud and very pointed anti-Russian remarks, to the point where I would have been I was uncomfortable, just because you don't talk about people in front of them, so you know they're going to hear with that kind of remark. But they really disliked the Russians, and a real problem for them was the people who had moved in from Russia with Russian heritage, and the children who were growing up in Estonia and talked Estonian better than they did Russian, though of course everybody had to learn Russian. But they were really what we would call native-born Estonians, but because they still carried Russian names and had Russian parentage or grandparentage, they were not as acceptable. And there was some discrimination, real discrimination, both in terms of jobs and in terms of social things. So that was an interesting point. Anyway, and then after that, the next spring, we had some of them come here, and again we entertained about 5 of them in town here, and I had them, some of them same people we had met in Estonia, but also some new ones. And we had, the Kasperzaks had 1 of them, 2 of them. I had 2 of them. Bonnie had 1, and I've forgotten who the other person was, but they were parceled out, and again we entertained them in terms of showing how to, trying to show them how America lived. They did not like sugar on snow, and that seemed to me one of the saddest things. You asked about the evolution of my peace concerns. I think probably one of the major influences has been my faith.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You asked about the evolution of my peace concerns, my peace activism. And I think that probably one of the major influences has been my faith, which I think has gotten stronger over the years. I did come from a family which was strongly religious, and church very much a part of our childhood and our growing up years. And as I told you, I went to a Quaker school, which added to that. But I also have been very, very deeply involved in my church, and I've done a lot of work in the church, which I've enjoyed doing, and it's important to me. But because of my faith, because I believe deeply in the Christian faith, and not just what's often perceived as Christianity, but what Jesus really preached. It seems to me that you can't live in this world without wanting peace for everybody, and people being treated with real justice. A little along the lines that Dave Dellinger uses with his concerns. I have, as I said, I've been very much involved, and when I was still teaching, I still was serving as treasurer of the North Congregational Church for 22 years, the total. I retired a couple of years ago from that. I've served as the chair of the mission committee, and I've served on various of the committees in the church, but that's because of the social aspects of it as much as anything, but because I believe that the church is important. But it's my faith that has led me into some of the other volunteer work. In particular, I think it's the one that sent me down to the Correctional Center. One of the passages in the scripture is that Jesus was telling his disciples to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit the sick and visit those in prison. And I've always, in my prayers, had a tendency to consider all of those people, but then as I was thinking about it, I didn't know any of the people in prison. They were just an unfaced, amorphous mass of people that I felt compassion for. Not that they didn't belong where they were, but that many of them had some reasons that they were there, that they had committed the offenses that sent them there. And I began to think, well, I really should do something about knowing some of them. And about that point, Pat Kasperzak was coordinator of volunteers, and I talked to her at the prison. And I talked to her, and she got me going, and so I go down there twice a week for a couple of hours to tutor, it also serves to keep my hand in at teaching, which I enjoy doing. And they're mostly young men, although not all by any means. And they're, generally speaking, they're not the most violent offenders down here. These are people who are in for DWI or sometimes some domestic violence or something of that sort, but not dangerous. I don't feel threatened. It took a little getting used to go through the gates and have them clang behind you. But at least I've got a chance to know some of them, and I'm able to relate to them. I don't try to be a psychiatrist for them, but just to relate to them as a person and help them with it.
7.
I was talking about things that have motivated me into going into some of these volunteer activities, and my Christianity really does. I think Jesus was a real radical. I do not understand people who use him as a symbol to tie people down and fence them in. I think he was a real radical, wanting to free people up and make them live richly, and that is the way I see it. I think Jesus might have wanted to join our coalition if he were around at this point. Not that we could tie him down either, because he certainly was a free spirit. But I have felt always that we need to open our hearts and our minds to his message, or at least I need to. But I also, the other part of my volunteering, and I do a lot of things that aren't particularly socially oriented, but because I just plain like to keep busy, I would find it pretty tiring to just live for my own pleasure and just do things to entertain myself, going to the movies and going to dinner and going to card parties or whatever would bore me, to be perfectly honest. I'm not that. I enjoy doing other things. So I enjoy my stint at the museum, and I enjoy doing some volunteer work for them. I enjoy doing the docent work at the Athenaeum for the art gallery. One of the reasons I especially enjoy both of those is meeting people, and we have people from all over the world as well as local people. Of course, the museum is a place where I continue to interact with children, which is a real treat for me. and I think that's important. But then my Christianity has also led me to assist at the community lunch, and I do that once a week when we're at North Church to help serve and clean up. I don't want to do the preparation. I'm not good at that. I can put on a good church supper, but I want to go out and plan it and buy the groceries for it, not just walk in and say, what do I do today? That's not my style. So I do help there, and I'm glad to see the people that come in there, and we can feed and alleviate their problems, some of their problems. So that's all part of my life, as well as my 9 grandchildren and my 3 kids and their spouses and so forth. So I have a fairly busy life, plenty to do.
All right, take 8.
This is my constant companion, Brandy. And she's a real comfort to me, a real pleasure. You asked about historical figures, and the one that leaps to mind is Martin Luther King. I was really, Brandy said, I was really beginning to, well, the whole civil rights struggle was very, as you remember, very traumatic and very revealing to me. I think I realized that people hadn't been treating, even though I lived in New Jersey and thought I was being nice to the blacks, that I really wasn't treating them as equals, and I'm very strongly in favor of treating them. So Martin Luther King was a real influence. I guess I admired people like Gandhi. I admire people who stand for the underdog. I like a lot of the things that Johnson wanted to do, because President Johnson, he really was trying to make life more equitable. And I feel very lucky that I'm one of the people that has been so privileged. And I feel that that's an obligation on me to try and spread it and give it away as much as I can. And not that I would consider wealthy, but I do give a lot and try to and want to. It's important to me.
Yeah, I'll read the question. What would you say to younger activists about our continuing struggles? Do you have anything you'd like to?
I think one of the things that has concerned me in the past years, between the time when my my own children were in college, and up till fairly recently, was that a lot of the activism and public concern had become me first, take care of me, and then the rest of the world can follow behind. And I'm glad to see some more concern and activism on the part of young people in college and in high school. I think it's great. We were not particularly activists when I was in college, and I'm sorry now that we weren't, but we were there, and I remember marching with some of the WAVE contingent that was training on our campus. That's the kind of activism we were doing, which isn't exactly what I'm thinking of. And I'm really delighted to see some of these young people. Sometimes I think they're terribly wrapped up in their own needs and wants. Like, I wish they were a little less worried about finding a place for them to meet. Not that they don't need that, and I think they should, but that seemed to be one of the paramount things. I was delighted to see some of the young people who were interested in setting up a garden and working in a garden to provide food for the food shelf and the community meals. I like to have the feeling that people are looking out beyond themselves and not just interested in themselves. And I think if a lot of them will do that, the world can't help but be a better place. So I guess that's what I'd say is, look beyond yourself. And there was a mountain ash here, and have you ever dealt with mountain ash? No. Well, there's some kind of a fly that lays its eggs on the leaves, and the caterpillar just strips it. I mean, literally. And it got so high up into the tree that I couldn't control it. And it just looked awful, so I finally had to take it down. And then I got some, my neighbor over here, quite often, so anyway, as a thank you, she gave me some money and I put it into that a Hardy for.
Oh, they do look here pretty well.
Well, the Hardy ones do, yeah. Older ones don't. The more traditional ones are the kind that don't bloom unless up here in the town, because they're covered with snow. These started to bloom. The running ones don't.
These are beautiful.
And a hummingbird can be bomb.
Yeah, me too.
But in this, the poem about daffodils.
Yes, that's
Yeah. And so in the spring, this is all daffodils. This year, I was away. Well, I saw them, but they were gone by the time I got back. I took a trip with my sister on the Mancat. I wanted to. I've never been to the West Coast. And got to see Yosemite and then drove around Utah in a car, saw Zion and Bryce and Capitol Reef and Arches. So that was neat. But anyway, I got
that
back.
must have been a great
It
trip.
really was. We went about 3 weeks. And, she just lost her husband last year, and we lost our other sister last year. So kind of important for us to get together. So anyway, but when I came back, my daffodils were all gone. So. But anyway, a lot of these are perennials. This is a perennial, and I don't know what it is, but it has a lovely yellow flower, and it blooms for a while, and then kind of dies back, and then blooms again. Big yellow blossom close to the ground. So, but
There's going to be some pink lilies.
yeah, those are one of the multicolored. White, they're quite edged in red, I think, or else the other way around. Colors. So, and my phlox don't always do well, but I always have early and lots of peonies, but they didn't do so well this year.
Really?